Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Van Dam. I am an Ecological Services Coordinator in the Wildland Vegetation Management Unit in Stewardship. I have been part of the Park District's Fuels Management Program since 2017. In that time, our Fuels Management Program has made some major advances in the way that we plan, prioritize, and conduct our work. Today, I'll be covering some of those details, but I will also be presenting on the larger picture of what's in the future for preserving biodiversity through land management. So, what is our role in our regional ecology? Well, East Bay Parks manages over 125,000 acres in the public trust, including 5,300 acres permitted for fuels management and 88,000 acres grazed for fire risk reduction and biodiversity. We engage with regional and state initiatives, including 30 by 30, and we collaborate with many sister agencies, state regulators, partners such as Together Bay Area, and many, many others. We have also led major projects, including the upcoming fine-scale vegetation mapping project led by our program manager, Dina Robertson, and continue to expand the pace and scale of fuels management work via the California Vegetation Treatment Program. First, I'm going to report on the objectives and results of some of our fuels management work. At its core, this work aims to change fire behavior through strategic vegetation management. We focus our work on fuel breaks in the wildland-urban interface, evacuation routes, using specific methods of fuel reduction to achieve our vegetation management goals. And we do this while protecting species and using restoration as a tool to enhance landscape resilience to threats such as catastrophic wildfire. We have 3 listed species that are covered in our permits, only 2 of which we really see in our work, pallid manzanita and Alameda whipsnake, as well as many special status species and important assemblages that we work to protect. These protective measures include biological site surveys prior to work, biological monitoring during work, and post-work surveys for 10 years following treatment. And we also take remedial action to address incidental issues, such as following up with erosion control, seeding, or planting. For our special status species, work is not just about avoiding and buffering them. Projects are conducted to actively improve the habitat conditions for the species. For pallid manzanita, management objectives are focused on clearing around the pallids and conducting activities that are designed to encourage regeneration. Here is our IPM and fire teams conducting flaming at Huckleberry Regional Preserve to kill French broom and encourage the pallid seedlings to come up. You will be hearing more about pallids today from our botanist, Michelle Hammond, as well. She'll give you a lot of detail on what we're doing to help the pallids. Alameda whipsnake, of course, is a highly mobile species that works both for and against us in our fuels management work. On the one hand, they are fast little snakes, and they seem to readily flee from equipment. On the other, we never quite know where they're going to show up. We did complete the Alameda whipsnake study mandated by the biological opinion. We really didn't know where we had AWS or how populations were distributed across the landscape, and trapping is the best way to determine that. And we learned a few critical things. 1, AWS are not everywhere. Of 120 of the total trap lines, only 20 trap lines were responsible for 100% of the AWS captures. So they really seem to be limited to small population clusters in a small part of the East Bay Hills fuels management area. That is Claremont Canyon and the area between Volmer Peak and Wildcat Canyon Road, as you can see on this map. They were not detected at all in Wildcat or Sibley. In the map here, you can see that each black or blue dot is a trap line. Black is the control and blue are the treatment trap lines. And only the yellow and pink colored areas were where AWS were detected. Here's the capture data from those 3 years of trapping. There were only 52 captures total in that time, and that included a few recaps, all in the specific localities as the map showed. Really, though, the most important thing I took away from the study is that AWS persist through fuels management with mechanical brush clearing occurring, which is great news and very valuable data. So what works in terms of protecting AWS? We have seen that they readily avoid active work areas, and we were unable to document any take in all 6 years of work in the study area. AWS were observed using treated areas to hunt following work, suggesting that brush thinning does not affect habitat function. Worker education programs seem to be helpful, as often workers are the first to see animals during work, and it is good to have them be aware and actively looking for animals. Using the same biologist on each project is also beneficial, as they can become familiar with the work area and the resources. Things that didn't work as well. AWS and most other species were never documented using protective cover boards on projects. This was possibly because the fuels management did not remove enough habitat to make cover boards a desirable refugium. And finally, so few whipsnake were detected in such a limited area that no statistically significant results were able to be generated from the data. However, 6 years of work coupled with the results of the study have given us some usable management implications. Most importantly, fuels management is compatible with AWS occupancy. This is probably because of a combination of noisy, slow-moving equipment that does not appear to be a threat to fast-moving AWS, and thinning of decadent dense brush canopy probably improves habitat function, particularly in monoculture backrest stands. This is supported by documentation of primary constituent element habitat in the Federal Register. And as with all species, habitat heterogeneity and diversity are important. Protecting species during specific work is important, but given the urgency facing our ecosystems, we need to think bigger. All East Bay ecosystems have been affected by historic and present-day stressors. We are not just protecting species, but looking at landscapes holistically in terms of resiliency and habitat function. I'm going to share with you some examples of how we're doing that. We do need to be mindful to differentiate the term disturbance from the term stressor. Disturbance is an ecosystem process, in many cases a critical one. Stressors push ecosystems into imbalance. In the absence of historic management, land managers have to use proxies for natural disturbance. Vegetation clearing, fire, and flooding can all be beneficial disturbances. An example of this is the SCU complex fire of 2020. This is our Alameda Whipsnake conservation property in Ohlone Regional Wilderness during 2020. The entire property burned and parts of it at quite high intensity. You can see this ash on the ground in some of the more high intensity burn areas. Here it is 1 year later. It is actually difficult to tell from a distance that this property burned at all. And 3 years later, in 2023, Ohlone Wilderness saw the most spectacular wildflower bloom, surely not of all time, but the most spectacular bloom of my lifetime. The yellow flower you see everywhere is Johnny Jump Up, or Viola pedunculata. It's a host plant of Calliope silver spot butterfly. And before the fire, we used to count this plant in terms of square feet. This year, it was just everywhere. And yes, we do still have snakes on this property, thankfully. Ohlone has been continuously grazed since European arrival, which is one of the reasons this fire was so beneficial. Grazing is incredibly important to keeping grasslands functioning. Now, in contrast, Round Top in the East Bay Hills lost grazing early and is being invaded by baccaris at a rapid pace. You can see the difference between a photograph from the early 1900s and a Google Earth image from today. You can see the scrub creeping up into the grasslands. So we're conducting pilot grassland restoration at Sibley, removing encroaching scrub to allow the grasslands to recover. Opening grasslands back up revives the original species and functions that make these ecosystems so important to wildlife. I think of this as maintaining ecosystem integrity, taking action to preserve the historic ecosystem. Grasslands, shrublands, and forests, over and over, we find that these systems are disturbance starved, and to preserve them and their function, we must implement proxies for historic disturbance. In grasslands, this includes grazing, clearing, and burning. In oak woodlands, we're mimicking recruitment events that used to be triggered by fire. Restoration is often needed as a lever to push ecosystems into a recovery trajectory. Our Oak Woodland Restoration Project launching this year is an example of assisting an ecosystem in recovery from active degradation. In this case, the project will be conducted in the wildland urban interface and will replace eucalyptus plantation and other high-risk fire risk cover types. Initial funding for this project was provided by California Native Plant Society, and we are actively seeking ongoing funding. We performed a site suitability analysis to find what areas would be most receptive to oak restoration. And you can see this reference site has a fairly widely spaced trees with a sparse understory, and that's in its natural state. And we're looking to this type of woodland, ensuring that the restored landscape can be maintained in a low fire risk state. Another project we launched this year is the Scenic Fire Resilience Project. This project is the result of a large wildfire that charred 120 acres of Carquinez Regional Shoreline in 2022. Most of the burn area was grassland, but the fire burned into a eucalyptus plantation and almost immediately shifted into an uncontrollable crown fire, which is what happens when fire reaches these densely crowded plantations. This was not the first time the grove had burned. It first burned in the 1980s and was removed by park staff, but the stumps were not treated, as was typical at the time. So the trees regrew into dense, multi-stemmed, very high-risk form, which is why it burned so intensely. And the fire killed approximately 85% of the trees. You can see this is September 2022, and we're seeing not a lot of resprouting or regrowth on any of these severely fire damaged trees. In October, our ecologist Rose Samuelson led the team that removed 18 acres of burned trees and masticated them in place, and it created a nice mulch over the burned soil. If this video doesn't look like much until you see that the equipment working is very, very large masticators. Huge equipment, and it's just dwarfed by the scale of this project. The project team buffered and protected stands of native vegetation, which were in pockets in between the eucalyptus. There was recovering pockets of elderberry, as you can see here, also native grasses. And we do plan to restore approximately 10 to 15 acres of oak savanna and native shrubs, but we expect much of the site was originally grassland and we'll return to that cover type. One benefit of the scenic fire is that we discovered several stands of rare and unusual plants and assemblages, including Diablohelianthella, rare and endemic to the Diablo range, and an unusual Yampa soaproot complex that was unknown to us until after the fire. That's what you can see here in the background. Very interesting cover type here. So there's a lot to look forward to. The future of our restoration work is beginning now. The wildland vegetation team is working to locate and survey reference sites for the communities we want to restore, as well as perform historical ecology and ecological assessment to determine where in the park district rare and important habitats have been lost. Climate adaptation is a critical piece of this work, as our ecosystems need to adapt to changing weather patterns, temperatures, and other threats in order to maintain their function. We'll be using new tools, such as the vine scale vegetation map, to guide our methodology. And we will continue to work to meet 30 by 30 goals, increasing the pace and scale of conservation and restoration. Thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed sharing our story with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our presentations. Thank you so much.